My intellectual stimulation came from my father.
Did he have dreams for you, for your future, and what you would do with your life?
Yes, he left it to me to choose what I wanted to do, and he was not very happy when I left university after 2 years in order to become a journalist. But still, he accepted it.
Where did you attend university?
Vienna.
In Vienna.
Yes. I studied philosophy and history of art and history in general.
What made you want to become a journalist?
It did not make me desire. You see, when I was 19 years old, nearly 20, I left Vienna and went to Berlin on my own. I left the university. And since I had to fend for myself, I started looking for a job and got a job in a news agency. This was a semi-American agency, United Telegraph. And so my journalism started. And later on, I was invited by an uncle of mine who was a psychiatrist and living in Jerusalem in charge of a mental hospital. He was unmarried and alone, and we had always a very close relation. He was the youngest brother of my mother, and he invited me to Jerusalem to stay with him for some time because he felt lonely. He opposed the idea of Zionism, and he was more or less isolated within his community. Well, I went to Jerusalem and stayed with him for some months, and there began my attraction to the Muslim world and through them to Islam.
What was your political and philosophical view at the time you came to Jerusalem?
My political views were nil. My philosophical views were those of a young, inexperienced man, and I wouldn't like to boast about them today. But I felt from the very first moment that the aim of Jewish colonization of Palestine and doing thereby wrong to the Arabs was immoral. And I became averse to the idea of Zionism from the very first moment of my contact with it. And then I decided to take up my journalistic career, which had just started in Berlin before I left it. I wrote an article, made 10 copies of it, and sent it to 10 newspapers in Europe. 9 of them didn't answer, and the 10th, this was the Frankfurter Zeitung, probably the most important newspaper at that time on the continent of Europe, accepted it and offered me the job of their special correspondent in the Middle East, which I accepted and began to write for them. Then I returned after, I went on a further journey for the newspaper to Syria, to Iraq.
What were you writing about?
I was writing mostly about people, about my feeling of people, the way they looked upon life and how they lived. That interested me more than political constellations of the moment. And apparently these articles were well received, and very soon I had a name in the German press. When I returned to Germany after an absence of 2 years, I wrote a book on those past journeys in German, which was called Unromantisches Morgenland. It means the non-romantic East, where I discussed, among other things, the idea of Zionism and question of Egyptian independence and so forth. Then, after a few months, I was sent out on another very long journey, which took me years. Went again to Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and returned via Central Asia and Russia to Europe.
You were coming back from Afghanistan.
Yes, but during that journey, there developed in me great attraction to Islam, which came first through my liking the Arabs in Palestine and Syria. I found them open and pleasant to deal with, and gradually I learned Bazari Arabic, could talk to some extent with them, and became interested in what they thought, what they imagined. And so I came upon Islam and started reading about it, became more and more interested.
When you learned Arabic, was it the language of the people first before you learned classic Arabic?
Of course. I learned my Arabic in the souk, in the bazaar, just picked up, as most of my languages were. Yeah. And then on my second long trip to the Muslim world, I was in Afghanistan, in Herat, western Afghanistan. And I rode in late autumn over the Hindu Kush mountains to Kabul. It was a journey of about 20 or 25 days on horseback, very hard journey. And on one occasion, my horse lost a shoe. So I was obliged to go off my road to a village nearby and had the shoe replaced by a smith. It happened so that the district governor there learned of the visit of a foreigner and invited me to spend the evening and the night in his house. He was a very friendly man. At that time I spoke Persian fluently after nearly 2 years in Persia and in Afghanistan. So conversation was easy. We were sitting after dinner and talking about various things, and naturally we came to talk about Islam. And I spoke quite bluntly to him. I told him, "You Muslims are a very strange people. You have the best ethical guidance possible in the Quran. You had the best guide in your prophet, Muhammad. How is it that you have abandoned the ways recommended in the Quran and by the prophet and have fallen into such a decadence? Why are you acting in so many ways against the precepts of the Quran?" And so it went on discussing. At the end he looked at me and he said, "You are a Muslim." I was quite astonished, and I said, "No, it never occurred to me to be a Muslim. I am not." He says, "Oh yes, you are a Muslim, only you don't know it. One day you will come to know it." And these were prophetic words. Later on, when I returned from that journey a few months later, I really became a Muslim.
Could you describe for us the actual event of your becoming a Muslim and how that took place?
Yes. After my return from my second long journey to the Muslim world, I was living in Berlin and started reading the Quran in translation because my Arabic was still insufficient to read it in its original language. And one day I was discussing it, of course, often with my first wife, who was a German, older than me, and who was equally interested in Islam. And one day we were traveling in the underground in Berlin. And this was in the year 1926. It was a year of great prosperity in Central Europe after years of misery and inflation, and all people were well dressed, people who were in the underground train together with us, well dressed and well fed apparently, but it appeared to me that their faces were not happy. And I looked from one to the other and saw there is unhappiness in these people. They are oppressed. And I turned to my wife, who was, by the way, a painter and accustomed to observe faces, and I said, "What do you think of the faces of these people?" And she said, "They are unhappy." Same impression she had. When I came home, I could not explain to myself why it was, because, as I said, it was a prosperity year in Central Europe. I happened to find an open copy of the German translation of the Quran on my desk, which I had left before going out. And I took it up, and the first which my eye came upon was a surah, Al-Hakum Takathuru, which in German is, "You are obsessed by," I'm translating it now into English, "You are obsessed by striving for more and more until you go down to your graves." Oh, you would, if you would but see it, and again, if you would see, and then you will see one day that you are in hell, and on that day you will be asked, "What did you do with the boon of life?" It came to my mind that this is the illustration of our present modern life. People are unsatisfied, wanting more and more material goods, and are unhappy, and they do not see that they are living in hell now. And God says in this verse, in this surah, one day you will see hell with the eye of certainty, and then you will be asked, what did you do with the boon of life? And I was so struck by it, by this coincidence of finding this surah as an explanation of what I had seen previously in the underground train. I told myself, how is it possible that a man living 1400 years ago had composed a book describing the situation of today, showing us what people feel now? No human being, not the greatest genius, could do such a thing, and especially not an Arab who was unlettered, who did not know anything beyond the confines of the Arab world. No, this book must be inspired, and inspired by whom? It is. Then I became certain that it was a revealed book. Next day, I went to the head of the Muslim community in Berlin, whom I had known superficially from before. It was an Indian Muslim gentleman by name of Abdul Jabbar Khairi, and I told him, I want to become a Muslim. What shall I do? He said, it's very simple, give me your hand. And I gave him my hand. He said, repeat after me, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, which I did. He says, you are a Muslim now. I said, good, accepted. And then he said, wait, your name is Leopold, Leo, lion, lion. In Arabic it is Asad. let your name be Muhammad Asad. It never occurred to me before to change my name, but since he suggested it, I accepted it. And I said, let it be Muhammad Asad. And so I became Muhammad Asad from that day on. That was in September 1926.
Thing that you knew intuitively that an Arab could not have intellectually...
An Arab, anybody. Plato, if he had lived at that time, could not have composed a book describing the situation 2,000 years, 1,400 years later. No, not the greatest genius, Arab or non-Arab, could do it himself, by himself. And later I found in the Quran many such indications of wisdom which could not come from a human mind, you know.
At that point, did it inspire you to go on to other things Islamically?
Oh,
where did that
then
take
I
you
started.
at that point?
Then I started learning Arabic, and some months later I went to Egypt, stayed for a time there. Later on, together with my wife, who became a Muslim together with me, and then we went on Hajj to Mecca.